And do you think that we will be able to, it's very interesting because right now there is a problem with food supply because there's been droughts and frosts in Mexico and California. And so this valley that we've depended on for our kind of winter produce, which is not seasonal, but it's grown afar, is no longer predictable and no longer really sustainable. I mean, that's what you see these big signs in the grocery store that says, look, there's problems in supply. So at some point in time, we really will need to get more people producing food on this island if we want to be able to provide enough food for the needs of the island. So what do you think is the solution to that? How are we going to get more farming done? How are we going to get more farmers? How are we going to meet the requirements of an island that could be without food if we had a major disaster?
I think what you're speaking about, the vulnerability of our supply is becoming clearer and clearer to people. So there is a real interest in looking at how I think that the momentum and the motivation is much greater. It's greater than it's ever, probably been in the last 40 years, which is really exciting. There are a lot of barriers in terms of our food production. Would this island ever be able to sustain its population? I think the Ministry of Agriculture has tried to do some research in terms of estimating how much land you need to feed a person, and it doesn't look very hopeful. But can we increase the amount of food grown on the island? Most definitely. So some of the barriers that we're seeing are in terms of young farmers accessing land, that the value of land that produces food versus the value of land that is a home, they're not equal. So it really is very challenging for young farmers who may not be in a farming background but want to get onto the land to get access to land. I think that's something we really need to look at. And there are some great ideas like the parklands levy that we have in this region, looking at a farmland levy so that we can begin to collect some resources together at a regional level and hold agricultural lands as agricultural lands and ensure that others can get access to them. So that's one area. Training, agriculture training and supports in agriculture have been really reduced. Locally we're hearing about that there aren't agrologists available to inform and advise farmers and share information, and that is something that I think there needs to be more investment in. So getting more people on the land and producing more food is absolutely critical, and there is lots going on. I think we have some quite inspiring stories. The Madrona farm story is well known, a young couple that said, we are committed to making this work, so how can we as a community invest in the land and ensure that it stays? We have small scale producers that are making a living on small plots of land, an acre or two, and are doing quite well. They are working very hard, but their land, their production practices are sustainable and they're doing well. So we've got lots of models and examples right here in our community of people who are addressing some of the barriers.
When I was on Esquimalt Council, I often thought that all this municipal land that's in grass could all be in food production, and we know that one of the ways that you can practice agriculture is spin agriculture, where you might have plots of land throughout a community where you're growing market crops and taking them and making a living as a farmer. And it was interesting when I was on council, it was like everybody thought I was, on a different planet. You can't do that. We have to have we have to have these manicured lawns. But I was talking to one of the administrators in Esquimalt the other day, and there's an openness now to that kind of thing. They now have a community garden on parkland. The park over here, Esquimalt Gorge Park, used to be a farm. We talked at one point in time about how that could be replaced. You could reintroduce farming to the park, and it could be an education. It could be one of those places where you train young farmers.
Oh, for sure.
To be farmers and to give them access to land that they need at a reasonable price and allow them to make profit from the land that they're using, even though it might be owned by a municipality or a nonprofit organization. What do you think because the Green Party is focused on provincial policy, what do you think would need to happen in terms of agricultural policy in British Columbia for us to understand the value of farming, to be willing to invest in farming in such a way that our farmers could actually make a decent living on the farm rather than having to take jobs in addition to
subsidize their food for us,
and to ensure that we have food security within the province?
Well, that's a big question, but at a very generic level, I would say applying a food security lens to decision making, really making sure that in land use, but also in health related issues. I mean, we haven't even touched on, the quality of food and the burgeoning health epidemic. And so I think that in any decision making, be that around infrastructure to farming and transportation, as well as land use and education and training, really, I think considering that with a food security lens would be very important at a provincial level. The other thing I think is that on the ground there is so much going on, and just as you're speaking about training farmers or wannabe farmers on land, we've got organizations like Life Cycles that have been doing this kind of thing and mentoring young farmers, but their funding is so precarious. So supporting some of the good work that is already going on, and if it's happening here, I know it's happening on the Lower Mainland. I'm sure it's happening very broadly. But really ramping up what is happening at a community level to support some of the real challenges that exist, because there are solutions, they're already here, and with some support we could make a big difference.
So part of it is having a policy land which is conscious of the need for food security, which means you have to be paying attention to what's happening elsewhere in the world, and I mean we have whole governments changing in the world because of food security issues, and we think we're immune from that, but of course we know we're not. And also the very big issue is money. How do we make sure that organizations that are making a positive contribution to our communities have adequate and stable funding so that they can continue to do that? Life Cycles being one of those, because I know Life Cycles goes up and down.
Oh, yeah.
It's a terribly stressful kind of thing when you think you're going to run out of money to pay your executive director.
Absolutely.
And should not be happening when they're an organization, for those of you who don't know, of young people that harvest fruit from trees that are in people's backyards to make sure that none of that goes to waste, and that matches gardens to people who want a garden, and really educate people about how important food security is. So I have, I think, reached the end of the questions I had. Do you have any questions of the Green Party or any comments to make about what we could do as a party to make sure that this issue is recognized as one of the most important things that we face?
I guess I want to thank you for just this opportunity, and we have known each other for quite a few years through your work at a municipal level and your active participation in CR Fair. So I really appreciate when citizens and elected officials and decision makers have an openness and a curiosity and a willingness to participate in what's going on at a community level. I think that's really, really important. So I think I would be very interested, because food and environmental issues and economic issues are so interconnected and interwoven. I would really be curious to hear just some of the ideas that the Green Party has in terms of ways of sustaining and strengthening food security.
So our belief is that most of the solutions to the problems we face, from poverty to climate change to an economy that booms and busts all over the place and destroys lives in the process, is to create self-sufficient local and regional economies. And that means increasing our investment in agriculture, making that local production a reality by matching land to people, giving people the opportunity for long tenures, because it often takes a farm 10 years before it can be profitable, and so you need to have that investment for the long term with young farmers. We believe that training needs to be matched to that local need, and so we would see schools of agriculture again.
Great.
Where you're investing, and also farms that are owned by those schools of agriculture, so that people can practice good farming practices. And it's not just at food production, so we believe that in agriculture, but we also believe that we need to be energy self-sufficient, so renewable energy, local use, and distribution. And so that's our belief, that virtually all of our problems could be solved if we relocalize our economies and create that commitment to pushing down the power to the local level, so that decisions can be made in such a way that we can recreate our sense of community and the power of that community to solve its own problems.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
Because we haven't touched too much on the access to food issue and poverty issues.
Right.
And I think, we are faced with more and more people who are working and needing to use the food bank, and some things that just don't seem to make sense.
Right.
I wonder if in terms of economic development and addressing issues related to poverty, because it does impact on food security at the eater end, we all are. If you have any things you'd like to share about that.
Well, the Green Party believes that we could eliminate poverty, but the only way that we can do it is by making sure that people have a sufficient income to work as a family. And so we propose that through either a basic income supplement to people who are living below the poverty line, or a guaranteed livable income. If we did that, you would pool all this money that's diffuse now and delivered in kind of a miserly way to people who need income. You would pool that money, for instance, from old age security and Canada Pension Plan and welfare and employment insurance, so that people would have a decent income from which they could make decisions about their family. And therefore you would have people with enough income to decide where they want to live and to choose their own home, rather than us feeling like we have to provide social housing. You would have an ability to make choices about the kinds of things you want to do as a family, so that, let's say you have a young couple and they're having kids, then one parent could stay home and know that they would have sufficient income as a family. So the Green Party is the only one that understands, I think, that if we want to eliminate poverty, which we do, we must make sure that people have sufficient income, and that gives them more choice about their family and the kinds of things that they can do. And in Canada, we have had an experiment with a guaranteed livable income. It was in Manitoba in the 70s. And the positive outcome of that 5-year experiment was that mums stayed home longer with their kids, which we know is critically important to family health, and young boys stayed in school longer. Both of those things are very positive outcomes.
Yep.
The things that people worried about, that people would stop work and just live off the dole, never happened. People continued to work, but those two very positive outcomes were part of that, the result of that experiment. And I believe that would happen in British Columbia. We know that families are way too stressed, and that we need that ability for families to make better choices for their kids and for themselves.
That's great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming and for participating in this. It's very exciting. And food security, of course, is one of the most important issues that we face. And the work that you've done at CR Fair, I've been so impressed that a group of volunteers has been committed to making this an agenda for our region and making a difference in the region. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. It's been great.
Great.